Hello and welcome to the interview here on France 24. I'm Delano D'Souza. My guest today is Sanjay Subrahmanyam, Distinguished Professor at UCLA and Professor at the Collège de France here in Paris. Sanjay Subrahmanyam has authored numerous books, including Europe's India, Words, People, Empires, which has been translated into French. The book centers around the European understanding of India in the early modern period between the 16th and the 19th century. Europe's India does this by focusing on first-hand accounts of European travelers in India at the time. Sanjay Subrahmanyam, thank you very much for joining us here.
Thank you.
On France 24. Now, Europe's India is a scholarly text, yet the manner in which it was written is very different. What inspired you to use first-person accounts of European travelers at the time?
Well, it's, of course, something that I have some familiarity with from earlier parts of my career. So I do know some of these texts reasonably well over a long period of time. The difference, of course, was that here I decided to pull them all together, and I decided to sort of try to build a big picture from them without at the same time losing some of the detail and the nuance that comes with the detail. So for me, it was a fairly natural option to go with these texts, because I do feel that you have to have a very direct link to the materials from the period in order to build a convincing argument.
Now, not all the actors in the book are known, even to historians. Was that intentional?
Yes, I did choose a particular route, which was essentially this: that to mix in a bunch of people who were relatively well known and then a bunch of people who were actually not that well known. Because I think that if you just go back to the usual suspects, as you might say, then you get the usual results. Whereas what I wanted to do was to actually make an argument between the two. So what it means is, for example, that some of these people, the ones who became famous, for instance, became famous because they actually published their texts already close to their lifetimes, and then some of these books became sort of bestsellers at their own time. Of course, there were others who never did that, but I think that their views were also important.
And I was surprised that not all of them were traders.
No, in fact, it's quite a variety of types of actors. So there are traders, there are administrators, there are doctors, there are even
the guy who
missionaries.
made the throne for Jahangir.
There are artisans like Augustin Hériard, who made the throne and who was interested in trading in elephants at the same time. Yeah.
Was sourcing the material difficult?
The point is that I've been doing this for a long time. So for me, it was not a question of it being difficult so much as the fact that, I had accumulated this material over a very long period of time.
Okay.
So that, certainly 20 years at least.
Now, the first travelers weren't interested in colonization, but somewhere something snapped and changed. What happened?
Well, of course, what changed was partly a question of what you might think of as what they saw as an opportunity opening up. That is to say, when you are, let's say, in the 17th century and you have in front of you a substantial empire like the Mughal Empire, which has a huge army, which has enormous resources, I don't think that the first thing that comes to your mind is, let's go and conquer this place. So in fact, what tended to happen was really in the 18th century, as this empire started fragmenting and then smaller states came into place, and especially because in 1740 there was a very important invasion by the Iranians who defeated the Mughals and showed that they were vulnerable. And I think that this sort of opened up in the Europeans' minds the idea that this was possible.
Now, one of the important myths you tackle is that the caste system was a modern phenomenon which came about during colonization, but you argue that this isn't so.
No, I think that the debates have now gone often between the two extremes. So some people who have claimed that the caste system has been exactly the same for 2,000 years or 3,000 years, which is a very traditional position to take, and then a position which is more the position taken by certain sort of constructivists and postmodernists and so on, which is it was invented very recently in the colonial period. And I happen to think that neither is true, which is to say it did exist. The idea of caste did exist, though the mo caste was a Portuguese word. The word was actually casta. But the difficulty is, in fact, that the Europeans took what they did observe, they took selectively from the facts that they observed and constructed a system. So I'm trying to actually propose that something did exist, but that thing which existed was not the same thing that might have existed, say, at the time of the Vedas.
Do you think Europeans understand India better now, thanks to globalization?
Well, I think that they understand certain parts of India better, but that's for a very curious reason. It's basically because India has also changed. And so the fact that you now have, the possibility of going to India and spending time there without even learning a single Indian language, which would have been very difficult to do 300 or 400 years ago, of course, that's made life easier for the Europeans. But the question is, which India do they know? I mean, they know the India which is accessible to them.
Now, I want to shift to present-day India because we have a government in power of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his BJP party, and they're slowly taking part in an effort to rewrite India's history. The RSS, which is a Hindu nationalist group the Prime Minister is very much a part of, they say that all Indians were Hindu at some point in time. This isn't true. How dangerous is what's going on in India at this time?
Well, it remains to be seen how dangerous it will eventually be, because the thing is that certainly it's the case that there is a desire to impose certain kinds of views on the part of the RSS. The RSS doesn't directly have power, so it operates through the BJP. And of course, the BJP doesn't hold power in equal measure everywhere in the country. So there are provinces where they have more or less power.
But there are a lot of states that typically were not BJP that have swung BJP.
That is true. But on the other hand, it goes up and down somewhat. Even in the last 4 years, there have been moments when it appeared that they would consolidate, but then there have been moments when it appears that it isn't so easy. So what it comes down to, I think, is this, that there is a project, and I think that if this government gets re-elected next year, which is a distinct possibility, and then is there in power in some form for the next 5 years, I think at the end of 10 years, they would have operated a significant set of changes. But I still believe that these changes would be very uneven, because I think that, today, if you live in Chennai or in Calcutta and so on, you still have that possibility of a certain distance from any diktat or imposition that comes to you. I mean, paradoxically, I think the people who are actually today in the academic world most under the gun are the people who are in Delhi, because they're the closest to power.
Closest to power. Now, one of the changes that is taking place, could soon be taking place in the state of Maharashtra. The state education board there wants to reorganize the syllabus and devote a lot less time to the Mughal Empire, which were Muslim rulers in India, just so our audience knows. They ruled India for, over 2 centuries, gave India some of its most iconic buildings, the Taj Mahal, the Red Fort in Delhi. A generation of Indian students is going to grow up not knowing who built these structures. What do historians like yourself do in the case of such?
Well, the thing is that what is going to happen eventually is this, that you can censor the textbooks or do things of this kind, but you can't actually, I don't think, completely wipe the slate clean. If people don't hear it in their textbooks, they may hear it somewhere else.
But if people aren't curious and don't want to find out for themselves, they're never going to know.
That is a danger. So there is a possibility, and we've seen this in other parts of the world where there have been official projects to wipe clean certain periods of the past, to remove them, excise them from the books. Yes, it's a real risk, but I'm still hopeful that I don't think the government is all powerful finally, and I do think that there is, and we are still not a dictatorship, and I hope we will never become one. So I do think that there are enough elements of pluralism in this society and in this political system, I hope, to guarantee that whatever view people are trying to impose will not be entirely successful.
Do you feel that your colleagues in Delhi who live so close to power self-censor themselves?
Oh, no. Some of them may do that, but actually many of them, it's very, very explicitly what they are told, and there's nothing terribly subtle about it. So it's not as if they are responding simply to some carrots which are being dangled in front of them. No, it's much more direct than that. But I mean, on the other hand, as I said, for instance, you can still publish books in Delhi which say exactly the opposite of what the official line is, and nobody can still prevent you.
Now, when, as you said, there are elections that are supposed to be held next year. When Narendra Modi rose to power in 2014, he said he's going to put toilets before temples. He's going to have to prove that he's done that if he wants to keep his prime ministership. Do you think Indians are willing to make concessions, knowing full well what the BJP is up to?
Well, let's bear in mind...
In the name of development.
let's bear in mind that after all, to win an election in the kind of political system that you have in India, you don't even need 30% of the popular vote, right? Because that's the way it works with the seats and so on and so forth. It's not a direct election, right? So the question is, I would be surprised if they even managed to get as much of the popular vote as they did the last time. But even that is enough to win the parliament. Are people going to be convinced that they have delivered, for instance, on the developmental front or the economic front, things that were stressed? I think that a lot of people will actually see that things haven't gotten that much better for them. Perhaps for some people they have. But I think that at the end of the day, you can still whip up enough sentiment against people who are supposedly anti-national or traitors or whatever it is to keep this thing going. And I am inclined to suspect that this is going to be good enough to work, at least in the next election.
We'll see what happens. Sanjay Subrahmanyam, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for watching. That wraps up this edition of The Interview. Thank you.